Hang on. And then in the back here, looking at installing these rear panels, and they're about ½ inch thick plastic, and I try to do this, hold the camera and hold this at the same time, but I'm not sure how these were intended to go in here, in that they don't fit. Hang on. Okay, so they hit the side over here, so when I'm up against the side of the engine bay opening there, and then you can see that the arc is off, and I'm also hitting the motor right here, and you don't want that. You don't want vibration, noise transmitted from the motor to the body of the car. So I'm going to have to adjust that fit a little bit and come up with a way to attach the panel to the vehicle. I'm not sure what their intended mounting setup is. You can see, they have holes, like 1/4-inch holes already drilled. This is, looks like the size and pattern for the J1772 charge port. So that's where that's going to go. So, plugging those in and out, you're putting a little bit of pressure on things. So, this has got to be secure in there. So, I have an idea of how I'm going to do it. So, I'll be working on that next. This side's a little more difficult because they've already plumbed and put the wire through and all this way. So I think I'm probably going to drop those two cables, get them out of the way, and then I only have these hoses, and they're fairly heavy hoses, and so we'll only have to do battle with those. So anyway, that's the current state, and a lot of this stuff isn't tight. It's just in place. And what we were contracted to do isn't to really do the conversion and put it in its finished form. What they wanted us to do is to get it running. So I'm only going to be doing the things necessary to get this thing running. So the panels kind of are, really need to be secured, so that's why I'm doing that. The throttle, of course, need to be in place so that we can drive it in the parking lot and show that it is operational. And of course we'll be having to make sure everything is snugged and done appropriately. So that's what we got to remember that we're doing, so we don't do too much. This is all just time and materials, and so we're not going to invest any more time than they would appreciate. So like I said, we're trying to find that line between getting it done and doing what needs to be done without going overboard and actually doing all the little detail stuff. So we'll probably get the wire situated, wire tied and organized, but I'm not going to loom it, so they don't have the cost of the loom and my labor in doing that, and they can do that themselves. So we're going to get all the stuff done that needs to be done to get the vehicle operating the way it's supposed to, and then they can take care of the final touches. I mean, they had the capability to do the whole thing. I think they just got frustrated and wanted additional assistance that wasn't available, and so, you know, we were contacted to get it over the hump and drivable. So that's what we're going to do. And like I said, I got to remind myself, so used to doing complete, conversions, I remind myself when we do some of these repairs and things like that, don't get carried away. So what we'll be doing is we'll be doing the work necessary to get this thing in drivable condition, and then taking notes of things that need their attention that they can do. So that's what we're doing, just so you know. Well, we installed the panel on the driver's side, and we installed the J1772 charge port, and it's wired up and it can plug into the charger, but we'll deal with that at a later time. Here's the fit. Let's see if I can get a better so it doesn't match the arc on this vintage of Bug. Like I said, I believe this is a 71. We also installed the passenger side, same profile of course. We removed the radiator, fans, and the coolant pump and reservoir just so that we could install this easier. Didn't have the wires and hoses and all that causing issues. We also removed the two double aught cables that were running to the inverter, and we're going to take care of all that later. So we just wanted to get our items that have a designated location and that other things will mount to. Want to get those in place. So we've got the engine bay inserts in place. We've got, like I said, we'll probably remove the charger and slightly relocate it, but that's the current status. Next, we're going to discuss how we're going to go about the big picture here, and for that we're going to go to the whiteboard. Okay, so in the wiring of our conversion, there's basically three categories of wiring. We're going to have the traction pack wiring. That's our battery pack or packs, the motor, your inverter controller, all that. And you've got your shunt, your disconnect switch. Those types of things are part of your traction pack wiring. Then you have your control wiring. And the control wiring would be like your input for your KSI, your battery monitoring, charging, throttle, any other control inputs that are either to or from the controller also. So the controller is going to control the main contactor in a lot of setups, and so that would be part of that control wiring. And then you have the accessory wiring. And accessory wiring will be things like your controller cooling, your power steering, your power brakes, your air conditioning, your heat, DC to DC converter. And some of these things are going to be low voltage. Some of them will be high voltage, high current, and some will be high voltage, low current. Example, your traction pack wiring that goes, from the battery through your disconnect switch to your main contactor to your controller and then back through your shunt to your battery pack. That's high voltage, high current. An example of high voltage, low current would be the charger output. So from the charger to your battery pack, that's low current compared to the rest of the traction system. You have the DC to DC converter, which is kind of a bridge between your high voltage and your low voltage, and so it's going to take high voltage but low current, and of course that's going to be converted to your 12 volt charging. So typically 13.8 to 14.6 volt output. And then whatever your traction pack voltage is on the inside. So, but those are accessory items. And so your heating and your AC, they can run off the traction pack. So it's not whether or not it's 12 volts or not that determines whether or not it's an accessory. It's just that there's a group of wiring that is necessary for the propulsion of the vehicle. That's your traction pack wiring. There's wiring that's, for the control of all these items. And so, a lot of throttles, electronic throttles, are 5 volts. Most of your other stuff will be 12 volts. And then the accessory stuff, like I said, will typically be a combination of traction pack voltage and 12 volts. So now you kind of have just a general description of these. What we're going to do next, you've seen kind of there's just wire run all over the place. We kind of got a little bit of a mess. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of lay out the components. So the motor, the inverter, and the charger, you've seen those are all located, and the charge port, those are all located in the engine bay. And then we're going to have a rear battery pack and a front battery pack. And those are, one's behind the rear seat and one's where the fuel tank was. So those things are kind of fixed. But there are some items that we got to figure out where we're going to put them. And it looks, based on what I've seen so far, that a lot of these components were designed by this kit layout to be under the rear seat on the opposite side, on the driver's side, opposite of the auxiliary battery. And so that's your main contactor, the fuse, and it looks like they have some other fuses and so forth. And then the DC to DC converter is going to be near the batteries where they have it sitting right now. So we'll see what we do with that. So anyway, so we're going to kind of confirm the layout of where these components are going to go. And then as far as the wiring, after we have the components in place, we're going to go and do the control wiring. And the reason we're going to do the control wiring first is because, one, we don't have the battery boxes yet. They're on order, they're being produced. And we're still bottom balancing the cells. So we're not really ready for this at this time. But we're going to do the control. And in the control wiring, we're going to have several steps that we're going to do first. And it's all based around the key switch input. And that's going to be our ignition switched 12-volt source. Typically we go through a safety interlock, which we will do in this also. So you can call it different things. We just always called it a safety interlock. Basically what I'm referring to is a setup that disables the vehicle whenever it's plugged in. So it doesn't matter if it's charging or not, but if it's plugged in, it's disabled. So you can't drive off with it plugged in. So we're going to have ignition switched. We're going to have a safety interlock. We typically install an inertia switch. The inertia switch disables the vehicle when it's in a severe collision. And then a low voltage cutout. And what that does is it shuts down the vehicle when your pack voltage reaches a minimum threshold to protect your cells from being over discharged. So those are the main KSI signal components, aspects. And so once we do that, determine where we're going to locate those items and wire that, and we'll test that. Then we're going to do the battery monitoring, and you can tell these two are going to be somewhat in conjunction with one another since we have a low voltage cutout as part of that. Then the other will be the charging, and of course we've already been working on our throttle mount and everything, but we'll run that wire back. Also the wiring from the inverter in general will run all of that. So there's a harness that goes from the inverter up to that Curtis 840 display. I don't know if they've run that yet or what, but we'll look. But we'll do that, and that type of thing. And then we can also mount and connect the DC to DC converter. This vehicle doesn't have power steering, power brakes. It doesn't have a heater. So this will be really the only accessory that I can think of at the moment. And hopefully by the time we do those things, our battery boxes will be ready and we can install the cells and run our wiring. And once everything's hooked up, then we'll do the interconnects, and we do our testing as we go along. And once that's done, everything's tested, then we will start to charge the traction pack. So that's kind of the overview of where we're going from here as we move forward on this project. This is kind of a balance because this is not a conversion that we're doing. This is just something we've picked up kind of midstream, and it's a labor and materials kind of thing. And so we're going to not be doing up anything fancy or anything. We'll leave that for the owners of the vehicle to do. We just want to get everything in place, secured, and working. And then any aesthetics and cosmetics that they can handle. So let's get to it.